In this video, we're going to review the different things we learned about decimals this week. The first thing is we're going to talk about how we change fractions into percents and decimals. Now remember, whenever we're working with fractions, percents, and decimals, it means we have a less than a whole. It means we can't represent it with one or more, it's less than that. So I'm going to use this picture right here to represent the whole. And you can see in this whole, it's divided into 100 equal pieces. And that's how we figure out decimals and percents, is by looking at how many pieces out of 100. So if the fraction was 23/100ths, this chart, I'm going to shade in 23/100ths. I'm just going to make a quick little squiggly line, and then that's 20, and then 3 more. So that's how much of this whole it represents, 23/100ths. Now if it's out of 100, if our denominator is 100, then we can figure out the percent and decimal immediately. You know the percent will be 23%. And we know the decimal will be 0.23, which is actually read 23/100ths. Let's try another one. So if I was to give you the fraction 6/10. Now you can tell right now if I want to add this into the picture, it may be a little difficult for me because it's in tenths. Now remember we learned we can easily change that into hundredths by multiplying the numerator and denominator by 100. And when we do that, we end up with 60/100ths. But either way, if it's 6/10 or 60/100ths, on this chart I can still figure it out. Because whenever I'm thinking about these hundredths and tenths, I just immediately think of money. We write money in decimals. And so when I'm working with hundredths, I'm working with pennies. When I'm working with tenths, I'm working with dimes. So over here, I'm going to shade in 60/100ths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can see I shaded in 60, or you can also see I shaded in 6/10 as well. Now when I'm trying to figure out the percent and decimals, it's really important to make sure that you can imagine what it is when the denominator is 100. It's really easy to get tricked. A lot of students would like to say that the decimal for this one is 0.06. But you can tell that's not true. If it was 0.6, I only would have shaded in 6 of these parts. But you can see I shaded in 60. It's much different than that. So it's really important to be careful when you're working with tenths, to make it so that it's hundredths instead. So then the percent would now be 60%. And the decimal could be written two ways, 0.60 or 0.6. Either way, it's the same amount. I would pronounce this one 60/100ths. I would pronounce this one 6/10. But either way, it's still equal. Let's try another one. 3/10. Now again, if I'm going to change it into a percent and a decimal, I'm going to go ahead and multiply both by 10 so that I can work with it so it's in the hundreds. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in 30, 10, 20, 30. And the percent is 30%, and the decimal can be written two ways, 0.3 or 0.30. I would read this decimal as 30/100ths, and this one as 3/10. Now another thing we practiced this week was actually reading decimals and writing them in word form. The really cool thing about decimals is the way you say them is the same way you would say the fraction. So I'll show you what I mean. Here in this fraction, you can see what it is. I don't want to say it yet. If I make this into a decimal, I know I have 0.23. Well, how would I say this fraction right here? I would say 23/100ths. And it's actually the same for how I say the decimal, 23/100ths. Now, if I don't have the fraction, sometimes what I like to do is if I see the decimal, I like to rewrite it as a fraction. That helps me pronounce it. 32/100ths. Another way you can look at it is by just looking at the place values. This is tenths, and this place value is hundredths. Sorry, I'm kind of writing, I was a little sloppy. So I know whenever I get past my decimal point, if I have a number over here, when I get to here I say and, but over here I would say 18 hundredths. That's the place value I end in. So let's try another one. 34 hundredths. So when I write it as a fraction, or as a decimal, you can see I say 32. That's the hundredths column. 34 hundredths. Now, if I have a fraction that's a tenth, changing this into a decimal, I can actually write it just as, if it's tenths, I know I'm going to put it in the tenths place. The other thing you can do is you can always change this fraction so that you're working with hundredths if you'd like. So you have 21 hundredths, and you would write it as 20 hundredths as well. And either answer is correct. So we're just going to try a couple, and then I'll send you on your way to do your math check-in. Take a moment, see if you can read this. You should have got 24 hundredths. Take a moment, try and read it. 8 tenths. Alright, now I'm going to give you one that has a whole that we'll have to read to. Take a moment, see if you can read it. 2 and 18 hundredths. Alright, last one. Let's do a big one before you leave. I'll give you a second to try. 624 and 89 hundredths.